All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Yelena Subasic with Massey Consulting. It's right at 2 o'clock right now, so we're gonna give maybe people 30 more seconds to trickle in and then we'll begin. All righty, I'm just gonna go ahead and start, and then for people who come in, welcome. But all right, everybody, happy Wednesday. Again, this is Yelena Subasic with Massey Consulting. Today's CloudBytes session is going to be on bank reconciliation insights, and this will be presented by Barbara Race. So, Barbara, if you can skip to the next slide. Okay, so just a little bit about Massey Consulting. Founded in 2002, comprised of CPAs, technical experts, and certified Sage Intacct and GP consultants. We are a Sage Intacct Premier Partner since 2013. We've made Sage Intacct President's Club 2014, 15, and 17. We are a Dynamics GP Gold Partner, ranked in top 300 small businesses in Southeast USA, and we are contributors to the NCACPA blog and some others. And just before I pass this on to Barbara, I wanted to let everybody know that in the chat box to the right of your screen, there's room for questions. So during the presentation, please feel free to type in any questions in the chat box and we'll go over them at the end of the presentation. So I'll hand it off to Barbara. I don't think we can hear you. Barbara, we can't hear you right now.
Can you hear me?
Can you unmute yourself? Okay.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. I would unmute and she would mute. So we were having a little bit of a technical difficulties there.
All right, we're good.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about key areas in a bank reconciliation. Well, hopefully after this session, you'll understand how to troubleshoot when you are not in balance on a bank reconciliation. We're going to review some common bank reconciliation issues. We're going to talk a little bit about multi-currency and intact global consolidation considerations to keep in the back of your mind if you are one of those companies, a multi-currency or a global consolidation company. And then we're going to do a couple of helpful tips. Okay, so let's talk about what a bank reconciliation is. So a bank reconciliation is a process performed by a company to ensure that their company records are correct and that the bank's records are also correct. So what you want to do is at least monthly do your bank reconciliations. What we have found is that there are some companies that don't look at a bank reconciliation for several months and then find out they are having problems. Something is off and they can't figure it out. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Try to do your bank reconciliations at least monthly. All right, on your initial bank reconciliation, so if this is the very first time you're doing a bank reconciliation, there are a few areas that are going to appear, and the beginning balance cutoff date is the one field that you will see. And what you ask yourself, what should I put in that? And that's going to be the date before you go live. And this only appears on the first reconciliation. And then the statement ending date is your statement date. The reconciliation mode is defaulted from the bank setup, and it can be overwritten on a bank by bank basis. And there are 3 types of reconciliation modes that you can use: manual, auto match, and auto match with review. And we'll talk about those a little bit when we get to Appendix B. All right. Again, when you have your initial bank reconciliation, you're going to upload or manually add your initial open items. And what are those? Those are going to be any checks, deposits that were outstanding on your last bank reconciliation that were completed in your old system. So the link that you see below, initial open items, that will only appear the very first time you reconcile the bank account. You have to remember that, again, these initial open items have no general ledger effect. The open items, again, can be added manually or via an import file. And we'll talk about, I'll show you where you can get that information when we get into Appendix A. And then the last thing you want to make sure you fill in is your statement ending balance, and that's the balance from the statement. So now when you go into your bank reconciliation, after you put all the data in that we just talked about, you're going to see your book balance, and that reflects the amount as shown on the general ledger on the statement ending date. This sum does not include any of your initial open items or the compensating entries for those items, and I'll explain that a little bit further, the compensating entries. The adjusted book balance is going to be your book balance plus any adjusting entries. And what is adjusting entry in Intacct? An adjusting entry is to a closed book when you use an adjustment journal and adjusting journal entry type. So your books have to be closed, and it means that you have done an adjusting journal entry. When you're in the and you see the amount to reconcile, that is going to be the amount that's remaining that you need to resolve before you can finish the reconciliation. And the amount to reconcile should be 0. So you want to remember that, that you have 0 balance before you have to see 0 in that amount to reconcile so you can reconcile the bank account. And I just want to point out a couple of the links off to the right on the page. Those are links so that if you did have to create a journal entry or add your interest charges or make a deposit when you're in your reconciliation, you can do those right from the links on this page. Now, one of the things you want to remember that the links are going to be different if this is considered an IGC company. So if you have enabled the multi-currency in a multi-entity company, it is recognized in Intacct as an Intacct Global Consolidation or IGC company. And this is going to change the links that you'll see at the top level. So you just want to make sure that you know that if your links are different, you are considered an IGC company because you have multi-currency or you have an IGC company standardization. So just keep that in mind. So now, Yelena, are there any questions?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about reconciliation steps. So the very first thing that you want to think about is where your bank is set up in Intacct. Are you setting it up at the top level or are you going to set it up at the entity level? So a few things to remember is if you have an entity level bank account, it can only be used at the entity level and it cannot be selected from the top to pay for another entity's bills. You also have to remember that once you set it at the entity level, you cannot move an entity level bank account to a top level bank account. If you wanted to do that, that would entail getting Intacct engineering assistance, and that would cost money. So it's a good thing to think about, where do you want your bank accounts to reside? At the top, so you do everything at the top level, or at the entity level? And then just remember that if you do put them down at the entity level and then find out that you need to move them to the top, it will take Intacct engineering's help to get those moved. So some other bank reconciliation steps you need to obtain a bank statement. You need to populate all the needed fields in your Intacct bank reconciliation screen, so the information we just covered. You can import bank information as needed if you're using AutoMatch or AutoMatch with Review. You have the ability to add attachments in a bank reconciliation, and then you want to go through and clear your bank items as needed. And then make sure that you click the reconcile when you are ready to reconcile the bank account. And then after you have reconciled the bank account, you want to review your reconciliation history report and your outstanding items report. If you are running into some problems when you're trying to reconcile your bank, one of the things you want to do is run a general ledger report. And remember to run the general ledger report by the inception to date. So use the inception to date reporting period that's available, and then run it and look at it. So you can look and see if there's anything that you missed, something that got added. So that's one good way to see if you're running into problems with reconciling your bank account, is to run the general ledger report. So when we do our initial bank reconciliation, we have put our initial open items into the bank account. So here on the top screen, you see those two items that we added for our initial open items. So we had a deposit of $1,500, and then we had a check of $123. When you go into your bank reconciliation, you're going to see an auto contra amount reflected. And that is the sum of the initial open items entered for the bank account. So, and this balance is just providing an offset to the outstanding items records for reconciliation purposes. And the auto contra, if you entered initial open items, you will see a total of those items appear when you're reconciling the item. You need to clear this item during the first reconciliation. This will only appear when you do your first reconciliation and if you have entered initial open items. If you get an error message that says error validating form data, you want to look at the date that you put for your beginning balance date. So why am I getting this? You have to remember that your beginning balance date is the day before you are live. So when you enter your initial open items, you need to make sure that those initial open items have a date that are either the beginning balance date, the date before you go live, or earlier. So for example, if you went live on January 1st, you want to make sure that all your initial open items have a date of 12/31 or prior. If you try to put in an initial open item that's 1/15, that will cause a problem because it's after you went live, and that item should be posted in Intacct, it shouldn't have been posted in your old system. So this is what that message is trying to tell you here. It's just that you have to make sure your initial open item dates are prior to you going live. So when you have the bank reconciliation, you're going to see this auto entry. Bank will say balance forward as the beginning of balance cutoff date. And you need to clear this item during the first reconciliation. And this item, the auto entry item, is a sum of all the GL transaction balances that you have brought in historically for this bank account. So it is a combination of everything that you have put in historically for the bank account, and you need to clear it when you do your first reconciliation. So let's talk now about a common bank reconciliation issues. Your amount to reconcile is not zero after all required entries have been cleared. So the very first thing is to do is validate that you are using the correct dates. So make sure your beginning balance cutoff date, your statement ending date, and other areas that have dates are the correct dates. You want to also ensure that you have cleared your auto entry and your auto contra on the initial bank reconciliation. You can run a general ledger report for the bank's cash account using what we talked about before, using the system reporting period of inception to date. And also, you may want to run a general ledger report to make sure you're looking at anything that was future dated. We all have transposed numbers before when we're keying things. So just go ahead and run a general ledger report and look and see if something got keyed as 2108 or 2109 in error. So you can always run a general ledger report for that bank account and just make sure there is nothing out in the future. And then compare your trial balance, your general ledger, and your book balances for the same bank account. Do they all agree? And if they don't, then you're going to have to do some digging and figure out where you're off. If you are in a cash and accrual environment, ensure your default reporting method is set to accrual on the GL configuration. So you go into your GL configuration and make sure that your default for reporting is accrual. Your bank book balance does not match your general ledger balance. Why? And these two amounts will not always match. One thing you have to remember is that the bank reconciliation will pull things based on the transaction document date, whereas the general ledger is pulling based on the GL posting date. So the two reports do not have to match in order for you to reconcile your bank account, and oftentimes they will not match. If the trial balance and general ledger do not match for the same bank account, make sure you are using the same filters for each report. One of the things you can do also, everyone should have a login to the Intacct community. You can go in and you can review articles by querying the bank reconciliation. They have very good articles out there and some helpful tips if you do find that you cannot get your general ledger and trial balance to balance. And then if you find that you cannot find it, you have to get ready to submit a support ticket to Massey Consulting, and that's support@masseyconsulting.net. And what you want to make sure that you include in that support ticket is you want to create a document to show all the steps you've taken to date. You want to provide screenshots where you can of what you've done, and then submit your case to the team support. Some other questions that come up when people are reconciling, they're asking, can I reverse entries made during the bank reconciliation? And yes, you can. If you've created an entry using the quick link, you can reverse it by going to cash management, the reports, and your bank register. You can run this report for the date of the transaction. To the right of the transaction will be a reverse link, but note, the bank reconciliation must be open for you to be able to reverse the transaction. That's very important, that the bank reconciliation is open to be able to reverse. Can I open a bank reconciliation? And yes, you can open a bank reconciliation. So you would click Reconcile Bank and enter the necessary information and select Continue and reopen last reconciliation. If you need to reopen more than one reconciliation, unfortunately, you have to open one reconciliation at a time. So if we're in May and you've reconciled April, March, and you find out you have to open March, you're going to have to open April and then open March. You can't just go to March and open it. So just be aware of that. And when you do go to reopen a bank reconciliation, you're going to get a warning if you have an attachment on the bank rec. And it's just simply telling you that if you make any changes to the bank rec, the attached document you have here may not match what you are doing. So make sure you have attachments available and ready to attach once you get finished with your your new bank reconciliation. Removing old entries entered into the initial open item screen of a bank reconciliation. So you cannot remove an open item once the bank reconciliation, the initial bank reconciliation is done. You will need to do a journal entry to reverse anything that you put through as an initial open item. So an example may be that when you were given the list of outstanding checks from the old system, you put the list in, and then you come to find out 2 months later, a month later, that that check actually was voided. To get that, usually you can just void the check within cash management, but because it was initial open, you cannot void it. So you would need to do a journal entry to reverse that check from the system. And that, again, is only for the initial open items. Reversing charges and fees entered during the bank reconciliation, and you can complete this by going to the bank register, going to the bank interest and charges screen, and reversing them. Again, remember, the bank reconciliation has to be open for you to have the reverse capability. What if I need to make a change to my bank account? So this is the bank account that you have set up as a checking account in your system. So once your bank account ID has had a transaction against it, changes should not be made to it. And why? And this is to prevent issues downstreams for the reconciliation. So one of the things Intacct recommends always is to create a new bank account ID and create a new GL account associated with this new bank account ID if you need to make a change to your bank account. And this will ensure there are no issues with the bank reconciliation going forward. So inactivate the old bank account and create a new one if you find that you need to make any type of changes and a transaction's already gone against a bank ID. What if I created my bank account at the top level and it should have been at the entity or vice versa? Again, remember, this would be an engineering effort to move the bank account from the top to the entity or vice versa, and would need to be scoped out on a case-by-case effort. When reconciling a bank account, the checks, debits, and deposit credits fields appear blank. Okay, some of the things you want to make sure is that check your sorting on your bank rec. So in the very first screen, there's a sorting. How do you have them sorted? Check dates and other details on that screen as well. So what is your statement cutoff date? A lot of times, just remember that if it's April 30th and that's the last time your bank rec was done, sometimes when you go over into May, it's still set at May 30. Make sure you set it to May 31st as your ending date. Check the same issue appears in all browsers. And this is a big issue because sometimes between browsers, things go amok and it'll work great in one browser and not in another browser. So just go ahead and check if you're using one browser, try another browser and see if you're having the same issue. All right, before I continue with multi-currency considerations, are there any questions, Yelena?
I still haven't seen any come through, but if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll address them. So I'll double check at the end of the presentation, Barbara, and we'll see if any come through.
Okay, thanks. All right, so a couple of things to consider if you're a multi-currency company. So what you want to, multi-currency, so this means entities all have the same base currency. So the bank account entries should be made in the same currency of the bank, and Intacct will convert those entries to the base currency of the company. So let's, for example, we have a US base currency company with a bank currency of Canadian dollars. So what we want to make sure that we do is when we enter our transaction, our currency equals Canadian dollars and our base currency is US dollars. Intacct converts the currency to the base currency. So enter the transaction currency and Intacct will convert it to the base currency. So the bank reconciliation view below that you see here shows the base amount in US dollars and lists transactions amount in the transaction currency. So here we have, if the entity is loaded in US base currency on the import or manually, the bank reconciliation will not do a conversion and the entry will not appear in the bank account. So what you have to remember is to make sure you're using the right transaction currency for the bank for it to appear. Okay, and multi-entity share company with different base currencies. So bank account entries should be made in the same currency again of the bank account, and Intacct will convert those entries to the base currency of the entity. It works the same as with multi-currency. So this is multi-entity with different base currencies. So you want to make sure that you're entering it the same way as you would with a multi-currency. Okay, so we're to some helpful tips if you're having issues with your items. So the first thing I want to talk about here is the bank account template. If you have many bank accounts that you need to upload, you can go ahead and get the templates from under Setup Cash Management. Most companies only have a few, so they manually add them, but if you do have a lot, use the template. It makes it a little quicker to upload. When you do your initial bank reconciliation, the very first time you go in to do your bank reconciliation, you're going to get the message, this is the first reconciliation, and it's going to ask you to enter the following information. And we talked about the dates and what to add there, and then you'll see this initial open items on the bottom. So you want to go ahead and get your open items in the system. So when you go in, you will click on the initial open items. You can manually add them, or you can get the template. So when you go in, you can see that the very first screen is saying add. The other screen is there will be an upload template for initial open items. And if you click on that red link, it will bring the template down for you and you can upload all the initial open items. Again, the bank transaction file template can be found if you are using AutoMatch or AutoMatch Review. When you go in to do your reconciliation, there will be a template up there for you to bring down. You will validate what this will do. If you have AutoMatch or AutoMatch Review set for your bank account, it will validate deposits. It allows users to set up criteria for matching deposits on the uploaded statement, and it will allow you to set criteria for matching checks on the uploaded statements in the checks. The AutoMatch with Review lets you change things. So most people like to use the AutoMatch with Review if you're thinking about using that. In a multi-entity company, you can reconcile any account for which you have top-level access, equal or greater entity restrictions, meaning the user must have the same entity restrictions as the bank account. If there is a mismatch, an error will appear below. And same form cannot be processed, cannot reconcile, log in or slide into the entity to reconcile. This behavior occurs due to the entity restrictions on the user. So to resolve the issue, remove entity restrictions from the user record or add the needed entity. So for example, if a user is restricted to entity 1 and the bank account is restricted and includes entity 1, this is the only entity that can use this bank account, and it must match what the user is restricted to, or you will get an error. If you need to add an attachment after you've done your reconciliation, you can do that. You can go into the reconciliation history and add your attachment there. And then dates matter. So validate your dates, as future dated transactions can affect your reconciliation. Okay, so reconciliation reports. So these are only accessible via the cash management activities and reconciliation history. The reconciliation report, the entire list of transactions that you cleared or remain open. So that report will show you both cleared and open transactions. The outstanding items report, this is a list of transactions that you have not cleared. So the bank reconciliation reports cannot be accessed via the reports module. They need to be accessed via the cash management reconciliation history. Can you reconcile more than one time a month? Yes. You may want to save each daily and only reconcile monthly, as changes may occur throughout the month. You can do it as many times as you want, weekly, daily, whatever makes sense for you, how much activity is happening with the bank. You just want to make sure that you save as you go through the process. Do bank reconciliations and credit card reconciliations work the same? Bank and credit card reconciliations work the same except when related to IGC. For more information, you want to look at the credit card inter-entity transactions. Can I enter negative values on a bank reconciliation import? Yes. Auto-match files can use negative values, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the Appendix B. Okay, another common issue is the user isn't able to view any outstanding items within their bank reconciliation. So one of the things that you can do and that appears after you do your initial reconciliation is the show all transaction fields. So you may want to kind of limit what you show for that transaction. And basically this field was added to the bank reconciliation to prevent performance issues. So Intacct added it when people were having some performance issues. By default, it will always be your cutoff date of a bank account. But by selecting some date, we can filter out the transactions before that date. And so it'll only show the transactions which are after selected date. So you can balance and reconcile with a smaller load of transactions. So if you are having an issue with seeing things, make sure that you try to work with this field as well and see if that will help. No data is appearing in my bank reconciliation when auto-match with review file is imported. The important thing here is to know that when you are filling out the template, it only, the auto-match with review needs the month, day, year field. So make sure that is what the field is that you're using for your date format. So here we're in Appendix A. This is just kind of showing your initial open items. So this is the template and then how they fall into the initial open items when you go in and look at them in Intacct. Here's one of our bank rec view of initial open item for the bank account. And you'll notice that there on the bottom you have your auto contra account that you need to clear out. And it'll show your initial open items within the body of the checks and deposits. So one of the things with the auto match with review, for withdrawals, which are checks paid, you want to make sure they're entered as negative amounts. And you want to make sure your deposits are shown as positive amounts when you're filling out the template. Another thing to remember with our auto match with review, it matches what it can from the bank account items to items imported from the file. And Intacct matches on check/doc number, amount, and posting date. And then remaining entries can be manually matched up as needed. So if you have something that comes over that doesn't match all three of the criteria, check or doc number, amount, and posting date, then you can manually clear that as well. And with that, I'm to our questions.
I'll give everybody a couple seconds to type in any questions, but I just wanted to let everybody know I always say this. These CloudBytes sessions, we do them once a month, and the topics, this is to help you all our Sage Intacct customers. So if anybody has any suggestions or would like to learn more about a specific topic, just send us an email and we'll make sure to include that in one of our future CloudBytes webinars. Barbara, I don't see any questions coming in right now, so yeah, you guys will get a copy of the recording and the slides probably tomorrow. That goes out through GoToWebinar. So I think that's it, Barbara. Thank you, everybody, and I hope everyone has a good rest of the week.
Thank you. Have a good day.